Okay, so overall I'm liking that from what I'm seeing, there's a structure. Okay, this is looking AI generated to me. I'm gonna have to have a look into this one, guys. It's pretty obvious to teachers when you're using AI. Yeah, I'm gonna have a look into who did this one later. Okay, so I don't want to dwell too much on that, but just know that it's clear. Okay, I like this as well. Technique, evidence. Yeah, I just want you guys to really be getting the point to the structure. I like this. This is good. Okay, so guys, do we understand everything that I want you to take out of this in terms of structuring it with the point sentence? You can see from these examples when it's done really well. Technique, evidence, analysis. Technique, evidence, analysis. Keeping that structure in play even when we do essays as well. Okay, so there was just one submission here that did. I'm not sure about the others, but we'll have to look into those. Okay, so guys, in general, obviously AI is not allowed to be using, and it is, pretty obvious to teachers who spend their days looking through responses. You guys are honestly just kind of wasting your own time and your parents' money for tutoring as well. So it's up to you if that's the decision you want to make. Obviously, we're not going to stand for it, but if that's the decision you want to make, you can make it. Okay? But thank you to everybody else who has been submitting good work. Okay. Yeah, okay, cool. So I think that's all I wanted to go through from the homework. We did spend our goal of 20-ish minutes. So let's now try to move on to our slides. Okay. And yes, I know that using AI is the minority. But just so you guys know, just keep it in mind that it does make mistakes and it does have some pretty key ways that teachers can tell when it is being used. There are some structures in the sentences, the way it phrases things. Okay, so righty. Can we see the slides, guys? Can we see the slides? Yes? Okay, cool. If you can't, try and reload. All right, so yeah, so how did you guys find the next 5 chapters? How did you guys find the 5 chapters that we did? Yeah, I'm seeing some goods, interestings. Okay, so how would you guys summarize what we kind of found, what we found out? I guess we're kind of seeing him explore for the first time. Chapters 1 to 5 was kind of just like we just get the story of him getting to the island. Yeah, we just see now a little bit more from him exploring and finding the berries, this kind of thing. His encounters, porcupine, learning a little bit more about the hatchet as well. Overall, I think it's pretty fun to see. I always wonder how I would survive if I was placed in this survival circumstance. And yes, for those wondering, it'll probably be a 5 chapter at a time. Do you guys think 5 chapters is a solid amount? Is it manageable to read 5 chapters over the week? Yeah? Okay. So 5 chapters will be good then. I just need to make sure that it actually will end up with you guys finishing the book, because I don't want to. If I do too little chapters, then we don't end up finishing the book. Okay, so with this, with these next 5 that we were working on, we're going to have a look at some quotes, and then we're basically just going to pop up an essay. Okay, so first we have the secret's pain. Okay. the memory was like a knife cutting into him. So we already saw this quote in one of the responses. I can't remember if I went into it last lesson. But we can see again, obviously there's a simile there, was like a knife cutting into him. We see violent imagery as well. So remember imagery, there's two techniques that I said you have to accompany with a word. Does anyone remember? Imagery is one of them. Does anyone remember what the other technique is that I said you have to accompany with a word? You can't just use the technique by itself. Does anybody remember? Does anybody remember? It's tone. Okay. So imagery and tone are things that are like neutral words that don't really mean much as a technique by itself. And it's more just when you put an adjective before it. Okay. That's when you need a technique. So violent imagery is a technique. But imagery by itself is not. All right. So yeah, so how we would deeper analyze this. So remember, I don't want your analysis, and I think the examples we saw were very, very good examples of analysis. But one thing that I really want to emphasize is you don't want to just be explaining what's happening in the quote. Okay. So you don't want to just be kind of saying like, oh, this simile highlights how the memory was very painful to him. Like, yes, you can start with that, but you always want to try and go deeper than that. Because that's basically rewording the quote. If you find that your analysis is just rewording the quote, then you're not really analyzing. You're almost like describing or explaining. But analyzing is kind of like the next level. Okay, so analysis shouldn't just be rewording. Okay. Rewording / describing what is happening in a quote. Okay, so look at another one. Divorce, it was an ugly word, he thought. A tearing ugly word that meant fights and yelling. Lawyers, divorce, a breaking word, an ugly breaking word. So there's very repetitive, very fragmented kind of thought. So fragmentation is another really interesting technique. It's when things are very broken up, shattered around, that kind of thing. And it kind of means like, it shows, especially when you've got a limited third-person narration. Does anyone remember the difference between limited third-person narration and omniscient? I'll explain what this means by broken up in a second, but does anyone remember the difference between limited third-person narration and omniscient third-person narration? Does anyone know what the difference is? So, okay, so omniscient. First of all, what does omniscient mean? Omni means all. Scient means knowing, like science. So omniscient is when the narrator knows all. Okay, so the narration type depends, even if it's in third person, you can either have a situation where the narrator is very objective and kind of sees all characters and knows all characters' motives and thoughts. Whereas this is limited. This novel is limited in that it's basically like first person, in that we only really know about the character. We don't know a big picture. We only know through his view, even though it uses third person narration. Okay? So it's like we're following him and we only know his emotions. Let's say two characters did meet up. I know this is a bit of a unique situation in terms of characters because he's kind of stranded. But let's say two characters did meet up. An omniscient third-person narration would know what both of them are thinking. Okay? So, let's say this is Mr. Stick and Mrs. Stick. Okay? If I was to do omniscient first-person narration, okay, I would be like, okay, Mr. Stick hesitantly grabbed Mrs. Stick's hands and chuckled a compliment, hoping to gain her approval or something. Mrs. Stick rolled her eyes, frustrated with how Mr. Stick's repetitive use of these lowly techniques. So in that narration, we know how both characters are thinking. Okay? Yeah, we just basically did a little story of Mr. Stick rizzing up Mrs. Stick. Okay, but we know how they're both thinking because Mrs. Stick is like, she was frustrated with how he's doing this over and over again. However, if we were going to be using limited, we would kind of be like, oh, Mrs. Stick tried to, whatever, whisper a compliment to her, but she pulled away, rolling her eyes, and he wasn't sure as to why, that kind of thing. Okay? Sorry if the example was a bit weird. It's just all that I could think of when I drew two characters. So, do you guys get that difference between limited and omniscient? It's very important to know because you can analyze the fact that this novel is limited. Okay. So this novel is limited third-person narration. So we only really know how he's thinking. We don't get a bit of a big picture of how he's actually going. If someone is, coming that kind of thing, we don't really get a big picture. We really only know what he knows. Okay. So we only know what he knows. So just give me a C, crystal clear, if you understand the difference in this narration type. So first person is when you use I, me, my. Third person is when we use this him, he, So it has to be third person. It can't be limited. Like, we don't really say limited first person. First person is just first person because it is by definition limited. If it's from my perspective, if I'm telling a story from my perspective, I can't know what Mrs. Stick is thinking. So first person, you never have to categorize because it's by definition from a person's perspective. Third person limited is when it's from a person's perspective, but we're using third person language. This is probably the most common narration type, third person limited. It's probably the most common narration type in novels. Okay, cool. So how does that link into fragmentation? So fragmentation, it's when you see how it's kind of, what I mean by broken up is the thoughts are a little bit scattered. A breaking word, an ugly word, divorce. Things are just kind of broken up a little bit rather than being a cohesive thought. Rather than being one straight up sentence that just makes a lot of sense, sometimes in the novel, there's a few kind of stream of consciousness little bits where it's just kind of collection of thoughts that, not necessarily unrelated, but they just feel a little bit like separate thoughts listed in a row. Okay? We especially see that in the quote that we were looking at. Someone's homework said, like, divorce, secrets, that kind of thing. When you kind of sandwich together a bunch of, I guess unrelated topics that don't really flow, and it feels a bit fragmented. All right. Sometimes when you're reading it, it just feels a little bit like you're jumping around between ideas. That's fragmentation. Okay. And it kind of shows that he is mentally feeling a bit fragmented, emotionally feeling a bit fragmented. Okay. Like he's feeling a little bit, his thoughts are all over the place. If he was feeling very calm and collected, his thoughts would be a much more like, divorce wasn't an idea that he liked to familiarize himself. And in fact, he thought it was quite ugly and that it could do damage, full stop. But instead, no, it's kind of like a tearing, ugly word that meant fights and yelling, divorce, a breaking word. He's kind of like, he's not expressing the thought in a very cohesive, straightforward way. It's jumping around a bit. Okay. Do you guys get that idea of fragmentation? It's a bit hard to explain without seeing lots of different examples, but it's a very good one to analyze because when things are broken up, it shows that that's how his thoughts are. So imagine if you were feeling a bit stressed, your thoughts would be all over the place. Okay. So this is something that's very not fragmented. You see the sentences are much more clear. The pilot sat large, his hands lightly on the wheel, feet on the rubber pedals. He seemed more a machine than a man, an extension of the plane. Just imagine like if your friend has run up to you and they seem stressed. To try and explain fragmentation a little bit more. If your friends run up to you and they seem a bit stressed, their thoughts might be a little bit like, and then this happened. Oh, and I then did this. There's a lot of jumping around the place and you might be like, okay, hold on, slow down. What happened first? What happened next? Like you want to try and get a more clear explanation. But before that, it's fragmented. Okay. And if your friend can't run, you can imagine them walking out of breath, walking up to you and then complaining about something in a fragmented way. Okay. The point was the fragmented, not the friend running up. All right. So yes, let's have a look at this. He seemed more a machine than a man, an extension of the plane. Look, this is still from the early the early novel. So let's maybe try and get into some of the later bits. His legs were on fire and his forehead felt as if somebody had been pounding on it with a hammer, but he could move. Okay, so metaphor, right? As soon as you say something that's not literally being said, fire, metaphor. His legs weren't actually aflame. All right, forehead felt as if somebody had been pounding on it with a hammer. This is a simile as well, as if somebody had been. Okay, so simile there, metaphor there, but he could move. Contrast, I guess, as well. If there's a better technique than contrast, then you can use it. But otherwise, it's always there for you. Okay, so I think it's probably good for us to try and get started with an essay. Okay, get started with actually doing some writing. I wanted to come into the slides just to talk about a few things, but it's really just quote analysis, and I think that quote analysis can be done just as effectively through the vision of a essay. Okay, so let me just make a document that we can deal with, and then we'll get started on that.